A cold wind passed through the narrow street as the little girl walked slowly, her shoes worn out and her dress too thin for the weather. She had been hungry for 2 days, with nothing but a piece of dry bread shared the night before. Her small hands rubbed against her empty stomach, trying to calm the sharp pain. Yet her eyes did not look for food that morning. They looked for something else, something she had always dreamed of but never touched. The sound of music guided her steps from the open door of a big hall. She heard laughter, the striking of piano keys, and the soft notes of violins. She stopped, frozen in place, her heart beat faster. For years she had listened outside windows and doors when someone played. For years she had imagined what it would feel like to sit in front of a real piano. She walked closer, pushing the door slightly open. The warmth of the hall spread over her cold skin. Inside, young boys and girls in fine clothes stood around. Some held instruments while others sat talking. At the front of the room stood a shining black grand piano, larger than any she had ever seen. Its polished surface reflected the light from the tall windows. For a moment she forgot her hunger. She forgot the cold. She forgot everything but the piano. She stepped inside carefully, hoping no one would notice her at first. But one boy did. He frowned and nudged his friend. Soon a few heads turned. The sight of the thin girl in her old dress did not fit in such a beautiful hall. Some of them laughed softly. Others whispered behind their hands. Her face turned red, but she walked closer. Her courage was shaking, but her heart pushed her forward. When she reached the group, she stood silently for a moment. Then she gathered her breath and asked in the smallest voice, "May I try the piano?" The room went quiet for a second, and then laughter broke out. A tall girl with shiny hair said, "You? Play the piano? Don't be silly," another boy shouted. "She doesn't even know where the keys are." Their voices stung like sharp needles. But the girl did not move. She pressed her lips together and looked only at the piano. Her question had been simple, but to them it sounded ridiculous. How could a hungry girl with no teacher know anything about music? Some pointed at her dress, whispering about her being poor. Some turned their backs, ignoring her as if she were dust on the floor. Still she stood there, trembling but unbroken. Finally, one boy said loudly, "Go away. This is not a place for beggars." His friends laughed again. The girl lowered her head, her stomach twisted with shame, yet inside her, something stronger than shame still lived. She was tired of being outside, tired of only listening. For once she wanted to sit, to touch the keys, to let her hands speak where her voice could not. She whispered again, almost to herself, "Just once. Let me play." No one seemed to care except for one old teacher sitting in the back. His sharp eyes watched her closely. He had seen her kind before, children who dreamed but never had a chance. Still, even he did not know what this child carried inside her. The girl took one more step toward the piano, ignoring the laughter, ignoring the whispers. She could not explain to them what the piano meant to her. She could not tell them that when she closed her eyes at night, she heard music in her head, not the sound of her empty stomach. She could not tell them that she had spent hours watching lessons through broken windows, memorizing every finger movement of the students inside. No one would believe her anyway. The hall felt heavy with voices mocking her, but in her ears, she only heard the silent call of the piano. It was as if the instrument was waiting for her, shining under the light, calling her name. For a hungry, lonely girl, that call was stronger than hunger. Stronger than fear. She stood there, a small figure in a world too big for her. Yet her eyes glowed with something the others could not understand. In that moment, the line between a beggar and a musician was thin. The girl was still poor, still hungry, still shaking from the cold, but deep inside, her heart carried something rare, something the fine clothes and mocking voices around her did not have. She carried music waiting to burst out, and though no one believed her, though they laughed and pointed, she knew if they gave her just one chance, only one, the piano would tell them the truth. The room that had once been filled with music now echoed with cruel laughter. The little girl stood frozen in the center, her cheeks burning as if someone had slapped her. Around her, the students whispered and giggled, each word sharper than a knife. One boy leaned toward his friend and said loudly enough for her to hear, "She probably thinks the black keys taste like candy." And the group burst into more laughter. The girl's lips trembled, but she did not speak. Her hands were pressed together tightly as if she was holding her courage inside her fingers. She had heard insults before on the street when she begged for food, but here in front of the piano she had always dreamed of, the words cut deeper. It was not just hunger in her stomach now, but shame rising like fire in her chest. Another girl with golden hair twirled her skirt and smirked. "Do you even know what music is? This piano costs more than your whole life." She laughed as if she had made the cleverest joke. Some of the others clapped their hands at her cruelty. The little girl lowered her head, but her eyes never left the piano. It stood there untouched, shining under the light, calling her silently while the world around her mocked. The voices grew louder. "Go home, little beggar," one shouted. "This is not a playground for you," another added. "You will break the keys with your dirty fingers," someone else sneered. Each word felt heavier than the last. The girl wished for a moment that she could disappear, that the floor would open and swallow her whole. But deep inside her, another wish burned brighter. Just one chance to play. Just one chance to show them she was more than their laughter. A tall boy with sharp eyes stepped forward and waved his hand toward the door. "Out," he said coldly. "You are wasting our time." The group nodded, agreeing. Their laughter softened into cruel smiles. They expected her to turn and leave, to run away with tears on her cheeks. That was the ending they wanted. An ending where their pride remained untouched and the piano untouched as well. But she did not move. She stood small and shaking. Yet her feet would not walk away. Something kept her in place, something stronger than shame. Stronger than fear, her heart, though fragile, beat with a rhythm no laughter could stop. She whispered so softly only the closest could hear, "Please, just once, let me play." The students rolled their eyes. "She won't stop," one muttered. "Pathetic," another said. They had grown tired of mocking to them. Her begging was almost boring now still. They would not give her what she wanted. Not even for a moment, because in their minds she was nothing. But their mocking did not end. It shifted, growing sharper. "Imagine if she touched the keys. The piano would smell of the street," a girl said, covering her nose dramatically. "Maybe she will play with one finger like a baby," laughed another. The group clapped and laughed harder. The sound filled the hall like an ugly storm. The little girl closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered nights when she had pressed her fingers against a broken wooden box. Pretending it was a piano, she remembered hearing music in her dreams, melodies flowing so clear and perfect that she woke up crying. Her hunger was real. Her poverty was real. But so was the music inside her, and nothing these children said could erase it still. The pain of their voices pressed down on her like heavy stones. Her throat tightened as if she could not breathe. She wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe she was nothing. Maybe her dream was foolish. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. If she cried, they would win. If she walked away, her dream would break. So she stood still, trembling but unbroken. The hall grew louder with their laughter. But among them sat one pair of eyes that did not laugh. An older teacher, gray-haired and silent, leaned back in his chair. He had seen arrogance before. He had seen poor children before, too. There was something about the way this girl did not leave. Something in the way her eyes refused to turn from the piano. It caught his attention, though he said nothing yet. The girl took a small step forward, and the laughter rose again. The children clapped as if it were a show, mocking every move she made, but she did not step back. Her voice shook, but she whispered again, "Please, let me play." Her words were almost lost in the noise, but they carried a strange weight, a kind of truth that the mocking voices could not cover completely. At that moment, the room was divided. On one side were the proud children with their cruel smiles and laughter. On the other side stood the hungry girl with empty hands but a full heart. It was a battle of pride against hope, of arrogance against a dream. No one knew yet what would happen, but in the air, there was a feeling that something was about to change. And though the mocking voices still filled the room, for the girl only one sound mattered, the silent, waiting voice of the piano calling her closer, calling her to prove them wrong. The laughter was still hanging in the air when the old teacher finally raised his hand. His voice was calm but firm. "Enough," he said. The students grew quiet. Though a few were still smiling, the girl stood frozen, unsure if he too was about to send her away, but instead, the teacher leaned forward and spoke slowly. "Let her touch the keys just once." The room buzzed with surprise. The children exchanged confused looks. Some chuckled, believing the teacher was joking. But when they saw the seriousness in his eyes, they grew restless. "Why, sir?" one girl asked. "She doesn't belong here," another boy added quickly. "She'll just embarrass herself." But the teacher shook his head. If she embarrasses herself, then you will have your proof. If not, then perhaps you will learn something." The words silenced even the loudest voices. The girl lifted her eyes in shock. Was this truly happening? Was someone finally giving her a chance? Her heart pounded so hard she thought they could hear it. Her stomach still ached with hunger, her legs trembled. But the hope inside her grew strong enough to carry her forward. The tall boy who had mocked her earlier leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Fine, let her try. This will be fun." The others nodded eagerly. They wanted to see her fail. They wanted to laugh at her mistake. The thought of watching her fumble over the keys was, to them, the perfect entertainment. The teacher gestured to the piano. "Go on, child," he said gently. The girl took one step, then another. Every footstep felt heavy. The silence in the hall pressed down on her. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back. Burning with judgment, some students whispered. Some crossed their arms, all of them waiting to watch her stumble. At last she reached the bench. The piano looked even bigger up close. Its polished black surface shone like a mirror. She saw her reflection in it, her thin frame, her messy hair, her tired eyes. She almost turned away, almost ran out the door, but then her fingers brushed against the cool ivory keys. And suddenly all the fear melted into something else, something deeper, something that felt like home. The students burst into laughter again. "Look at her," one said. "She doesn't even know how to sit." And it was true. Her small legs dangled above the ground when she lowered herself onto the bench. She struggled to reach the pedals, her dress torn at the edges, looked out of place against the grand piano's beauty. To the students, it was a picture of absurdity. But the teacher remained silent, his eyes never leaving her. The girl placed both hands on her lap for a moment, closing her eyes. She remembered the nights she had stood outside windows, watching fingers dance on the keys. She remembered copying the movements in the air, memorizing every position. She remembered dreaming of this very moment. Though she never believed it would come true, she lifted her hands slowly, placing her small fingers on the keys. Her touch was gentle, almost like a whisper. For a moment, the hall was filled with silence. The children leaned forward, eager for her first mistake, eager to laugh again. But the teacher leaned forward too, not with mockery, but with curiosity. Her chest rose and fell as she took a deep breath. She ignored the whispers, ignored the hungry pain in her stomach, ignored the cruel eyes around her. At this moment, there was only the piano in her. She pressed her first note, and the soft sound echoed across the hall like the beginning of a secret. The children snickered. "One finger," a boy whispered. But she did not stop. Her other hand joined. Then another note, then another. The sound began to form into something more than random noise. The teacher's eyes widened, his heart skipped a beat. The girl's fingers, though small and weak, carried certainty. They did not fumble. They knew where to go. The children fell quiet, the smirks fading from their faces. The girl was no longer the hungry beggar in their eyes. In that moment she was something else, something none of them could yet name. And though the music had only just begun, a strange feeling swept over the hall, as if the air itself was waiting for what was to come. Still, none of them spoke. They wanted to see how long she could keep going before she failed. None of them realized that failure was not what was about to come. The first note still hung in the air, soft and gentle, like the whisper of a secret no one had ever heard before. The girl's fingers trembled, but the sound of the piano gave her strength. Slowly, her other hand joined in, and the notes began to flow together. At first it was uncertain, like a bird testing its wings. Then suddenly it grew stronger, clearer, and more beautiful. The students who had been waiting to laugh leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. Something about the way her fingers moved didn't look like guessing. It didn't look like chance, it looked like memory, like practice. Like a hidden gift finally set free, the teacher's heart began to race. His old ears had heard countless students try and fail. But this was different. The girl forgot the laughter, forgot the hunger clawing at her stomach. She forgot the coldness of the world around her. In her mind, the hall disappeared. She was no longer a poor child sitting on a bench too big for her. She was flying, her fingers guiding her across a sky made of music. Every note became a star, every chord a sunrise. The melody grew, soft at first, then brighter, richer. Her tiny hands moved with a speed and grace that stunned even herself. She had never touched such a fine piano before, yet it felt natural, as if her soul had been waiting for this exact instrument. She pressed the pedals carefully, her legs stretching far to reach. But even those small movements carried perfect timing. One boy gasped without meaning to. He quickly covered his mouth, but the sound had already escaped. The others glanced at him, then back at the girl. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by wide eyes and parted lips. They could not believe what they were hearing. This was not the random noise they had imagined. This was music, real music. The girl's face glowed. Her eyes were half closed, lost in the world she was creating. Her body was thin, fragile, and hungry, but her music was strong, overflowing, unstoppable. The sound filled the hall like water filling an empty jar. Every corner of the room carried her melody, washing away the cruelty, washing away the doubt. The teacher leaned forward, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair. His eyes were wet, though he did not know why. He whispered under his breath, "A prodigy." The word slipped out like a prayer, and though no one else heard it, the truth of it hung in the air. The children's silence grew heavy, not with boredom but with awe. Each note the girl played struck something deep inside them, something they had not felt before. Some of them lowered their heads, ashamed of their laughter. Others stared as if they were watching a miracle. The tall boy who had mocked her the loudest sat stiffly, his pride burning. Yet even he could not deny the beauty spilling out from the piano. The melody rose higher, like a bird soaring above mountains. Her fingers danced faster, weaving together sounds that told a story no words could capture: the pain of hunger, the loneliness of nights spent outside, the dreams she had hidden in her heart. All of it flowed through the keys. She was not just playing music, she was speaking through it, telling them who she really was. The hall no longer felt like a place of judgment. It felt like a stage for truth. Every second pulled the listeners deeper. Some students forgot to breathe. Others held their hands tightly as if afraid the sound would vanish. Even the dust in the air seemed to glow in the sunlight pouring through the windows. Carried by the music into something magical, the girl's heart pounded with every note, not from fear but from freedom. For the first time in her life, she was not hiding her gift. For the first time, she was not an outsider. In this moment, she was the music. She belonged to it, and it belonged to her then. Just as suddenly as it began, her melody softened, slowing. Her fingers glided gently across the keys, letting the sound fade like the last rays of sunset. The final note lingered in the air, warm and trembling, refusing to let go. The silence that followed was heavy, deeper than the laughter had ever been. It was the kind of silence that only came after something truly extraordinary. The girl lowered her hands into her lap, her chest rising and falling. She did not look at the others, she only looked at the piano. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, a smile of relief, a smile of knowing. For once, she had spoken her truth and no one could take it away. The students stared, their eyes wide, their words stolen from them. No one laughed now, no one dared. The hall was no longer filled with mockery. It was filled with the echo of genius. The final note still hung in the air like a golden thread, so delicate and yet so strong for a long moment. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire hall had forgotten how to breathe. The little girl sat frozen on the bench, her hands resting on her lap. Her heart racing, she dared not look at anyone, afraid the laughter would return, afraid it had all been a dream. But the laughter did not come. Instead, there was silence, thick and heavy. The same children who had mocked her only minutes before now stared with wide eyes. Their mouths were open, but no words came out. Some clutched their chairs as if they needed something to hold them steady. Others simply sat still, caught between disbelief and awe. A girl who had been the loudest in her teasing slowly lowered her gaze. Her cheeks turned red. She felt her own pride shatter like glass. How foolish her words seemed now. How small her laughter felt against the sound that still echoed in her memory. She had laughed at a beggar, but what she had heard was not the noise of a beggar. It was the voice of a genius. Another boy rubbed his forehead as if trying to wake up from a dream. "It can't be," he whispered under his breath. She shouldn't know how to play like that. Yet he had heard it, they all had. There was no denying it. No excuse, no lie strong enough to cover the truth that had unfolded before them. The tall boy who had ordered her out clenched his fists under the table. His pride burned hotter than fire. For him, the shame was unbearable. He wanted to stand, to shout, to say it had been luck, but deep inside even he knew luck could not create such beauty. The memory of her music had already carved itself into his heart, and he could not escape it. The teacher in the back remained silent, his wise eyes fixed on the girl. He had seen talent in many forms, but rarely had he seen such raw power, such purity, such truth. He felt the weight of what had just happened, and though he stayed quiet, his heart whispered that the future of music might have just walked into this room disguised as a hungry child. The other children shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided looking at the girl, ashamed of the words they had thrown at her like stones. Others stared at her openly now, not with mockery, but with something close to fear. It was the fear of realizing they had been wrong, that someone they thought beneath them had risen above them all in a single moment. The girl finally looked up. Her eyes scanned the room nervously, expecting anger, expecting more laughter. But what she saw instead stunned her. Silence, awe, and even guilt in some faces. Her heart swelled, not with pride but with relief. For once she had not been invisible. For once the world had listened. Her small body trembled from exhaustion, her stomach still twisted with hunger, but her spirit soared. She had given them her truth, and they could not deny it. Even if they hated her, even if they wanted to, they could not erase the sound of what they had just heard. The music lived inside them now, refusing to be forgotten. One girl whispered to her neighbor, "How did she do that?" But the neighbor only shook her head. No one knew. They had thought her weak, foolish, hopeless, but in the space of a single song, she had turned their world upside down. She had taken their laughter and broken it, replaced it with wonder. The hall, once filled with cruel voices, now felt like a sacred place. The piano stood shining in the light, no longer a symbol of their pride but a witness to her victory. Every child there would remember this day, some with shame, some with admiration, but none could forget. The little girl placed her hand gently on the piano once more, as if to thank it for speaking when she could not. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. It was not a smile of triumph but of peace, for in this moment, she knew she had shown them the truth of who she was. The silence stretched on, thick and unbroken, until it became almost unbearable. Then slowly, softly, a single pair of hands began to clap. The sound echoed in the hall. Steady and strong, it was the old teacher, his eyes still shining as he applauded. Soon others joined, though their faces burned with shame. Their hands clapped because their hearts demanded it. Even the ones who hated her most could not keep still. Their pride was broken, but their spirits had been moved. And so the applause grew louder, filling the hall, drowning out the memory of their cruel laughter, replacing it with something greater, something honest. The girl bowed her head, her eyes wet with tears she had tried so hard to hold back. She had not come for applause, she had not come for praise. She had only come to touch the piano. But in touching it, she had touched their souls. And though the applause now filled the hall, the true sound that lingered was not the clapping. It was her music still echoing in their hearts, still alive in the silence between beats, still reminding them of what they had seen and heard, a miracle born from hunger, courage, and a dream. The applause still echoed in the hall, but soon it softened, replaced by whispers. The children looked at each other. Confused and curious, questions filled their minds. Questions that none of them could answer. How could a girl like her, dressed in torn clothes and smelling of hunger, play like that? How could she move her fingers with such certainty when she had never been seen in a classroom, never been seen with a teacher, never been seen with a single sheet of music? One girl leaned closer to her friend and whispered, "Do you think she has been hiding lessons? Maybe some rich family taught her secretly." But her friend shook her head quickly. "No, look at her. She is no rich child. She looks like she has not eaten in days." Their voices were hushed, but the girl on the piano bench could still feel their eyes, heavy with questions she could not answer. The tall boy who had mocked her most clenched his jaw. His pride would not allow him to believe she was simply gifted. "It must be luck," he muttered. She pressed random keys. "That is all." But even as he said it, his heart twisted, for deep inside he knew the truth. That music had not been luck. It had been alive, powerful, too perfect to be chance. The old teacher remained silent, but in his mind memories stirred. He remembered rumors whispered in the market about a small girl seen standing outside music schools, peeking through broken windows, watching every move of the students inside. He remembered once passing a dark alley and hearing faint notes tapped on pieces of wood, as if someone were pretending to play a piano that did not exist. At the time he had thought it strange, but now those fragments returned to him, fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. The whispers grew louder. "Maybe she used to sneak into lessons," said one boy. "Maybe she listened at doors and windows," another added. But even if she did, how could she remember everything so perfectly? A girl asked, shaking her head. The puzzle had no clear answer, and that made the mystery even greater. The little girl sat quietly, her eyes lowered. She could hear them questioning, doubting, searching for reasons, but she did not speak. How could she explain the nights she had spent pressing her fingers against bricks, imagining they were keys? How could she explain the hours of listening in silence, memorizing each sound, storing it like treasure in her hungry heart? How could she tell them that music was her food, her escape, her only light in the long darkness of poverty? Her silence only made the whispers stronger. Some of the students began to feel uneasy. It was easier to mock her when they believed she was beneath them. But now that she had proven her gift, they did not know where to place her. She was not one of them, not dressed in fine clothes or carrying shiny instruments, yet she was above them, soaring higher with nothing but her bare hands. The tall boy slammed his hand on his chair. "It doesn't matter how she learned," he said sharply. "She is still nothing. One song does not make her great." His words cut through the whispers, but they did not erase what everyone had felt. Even he could not erase it from himself. The sound of her music still haunted his chest, echoing against his pride like a drum. The teacher stood slowly. His old bones creaked as he rose. The students turned to him, waiting. He cleared his throat and said, "Some gifts cannot be taught. Some children are born with music in their blood." His eyes moved to the girl, softening, and hunger cannot starve such a gift. It only sharpens it. The hall grew silent again, his words sinking into every heart. The girl lifted her head slightly, her eyes met his, and for the first time that day she saw no mockery, no doubt, only understanding. It was enough to make her chest tighten with emotion. She wanted to thank him, but her voice refused to come. Her gratitude shone instead through her trembling smile. The whispers did not end. They followed her like shadows. Some students whispered in awe, calling her a miracle. Others whispered in bitterness, calling her a trick. But none could stop the truth from spreading. The story of the hungry girl who played like a prodigy would leave this hall. It would travel through mouths and ears, carried into the streets, into the markets, into the homes of strangers. For some, it would be a story of inspiration, a spark of hope. For others, it would be a story of jealousy, a reminder of their own limits. But for the girl, it was neither. For her, it was simply a step. One step closer to the dream she had guarded in silence. One step closer to proving that even a starving child could hold the power of music. And though the students could not understand how she had done it, though their whispers twisted with wonder and doubt, one truth became clear. The girl who had entered the hall as a beggar had left behind something greater than hunger or shame. She had left behind the mark of a prodigy. The whispers in the hall grew softer as the girl placed her hands back on the piano. She had been silent for a moment, her heart pounding, her breath uneven, but something inside her told her she was not finished. Not yet. The first song had shown them her voice. But now her soul demanded more. It demanded that she rise higher, that she play not just for them but for herself. The students leaned forward again. Some still doubted, some still burned with jealousy, but all of them waited. The teacher's eyes shone with quiet expectation. He could feel it too, that this was only the beginning. The girl pressed the first note, soft and trembling. It echoed in the silence like the start of a storm. Her other hand joined, her fingers flowing quickly now, weaving patterns of sound that lifted into the air like wings. The melody grew, rising higher, richer, filling every corner of the hall. This was not practice, this was not luck. This was something greater. Her body swayed with the rhythm, her face glowing with passion. The music carried her far beyond the hunger in her stomach, far beyond the shame of mockery, commanding the hall with nothing but her fragile hands. The children gasped as the notes climbed faster, stronger. Her fingers moved like streams of water rushing over rocks, smooth, unstoppable. They had never seen such speed, such precision, not from her, not from any of their own classmates. A girl who had begged to play was now playing better than any of them could dream. The tall boy gripped the edge of his chair until his knuckles turned white. His pride screamed at him to deny what he was hearing. But his ears betrayed him. His heart thumped in time with her music, each note breaking down the walls of his arrogance. He could not stop listening no matter how much he wanted to. The melody rose into a storm, wild yet controlled, powerful yet graceful. It told a story without words, the story of a child who had known hunger, who had known cold, who had known loneliness, yet had never let go of her dream. Every strike of the keys was her pain. Her courage, her hope, poured into sound. The students sat frozen, their eyes wide. Some held their breath. Others clutched their chests. The music pulled at them, tore at them, healed them all at once. It was not simply a performance, it was a confession. An unveiling of a soul too strong to be broken. The teacher closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. He had trained many children, but never had he felt this. He whispered again, almost like a prayer. Prodigy. His voice shook with awe, and his heart knew he was witnessing a moment that would never return again. Not in the same way. The girl's arms moved with power, her fingers flying, but her face was calm. Her eyes shone with tears she did not shed. She was not only playing for them, she was playing for the little girl inside herself. The one who had stood outside windows in the cold, the one who had touched broken wood pretending it was ivory, the one who had dreamed of this moment when the world would finally hear her. The music reached its peak, a roar of emotion wrapped in perfect harmony. It was as if thunder and sunlight had joined together. Her small frame shook with the force of it. Yet she did not stop. She poured every hidden dream, every forgotten night, every silent tear into the keys. Then slowly the storm began to soften. The notes fell gently. Like raindrops after lightning, her fingers slowed. The melody calming, turning tender. Every listener leaned forward, unwilling to miss a single sound. Their hearts had been pulled to the edge of cliffs. Now they were carried back gently, safely, lovingly. The final notes came, trembling but sure, a farewell, a promise, a truth. Her hands pressed the last chord, and the sound filled the hall like the glow of a sunset. Warm, endless, unforgettable. She held it, letting it linger, refusing to let it vanish too soon. And then silence. The hall that had once roared with laughter was now still as stone. The children sat frozen, their mouths open, their hearts shaken. The air itself felt heavy, as if it too had been transformed by her song. The girl sat back slowly, her chest rising and falling. Her hands dropped into her lap. Exhausted, her body was weak, but her spirit was alight. She had given them everything she had and more. She had climbed the mountain of music and reached the peak. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. They could not. Their voices had been stolen by the music. Their pride shattered, their doubts erased. They had asked her to prove herself, and she had given them not proof, but a miracle. The girl looked at the piano. Her lips forming a tiny smile, she whispered inside herself, "Thank you," for she knew this instrument had been waiting for her as much as she had been waiting for it. And though silence filled the hall inside every heart, her music still played, refusing to fade, refusing to be forgotten. The hall was silent, so silent that even the sound of breathing felt loud. The little girl sat at the piano bench, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to catch her breath. Her stomach was still empty, her body still weak, but her spirit was shining. She had given them everything inside her, and now all she could do was wait. Then slowly the silence broke. The old teacher began to clap. His hands moved with steady rhythm, each clap full of respect. The sound echoed across the hall, and soon others followed. First a few hesitant claps, then more, until the whole hall was filled with applause. It was not the cruel laughter from before. It was not mocking, it was real, honest, and full of awe. The girl lowered her head, tears filling her eyes. She had not come for applause, she had not even come for praise. She had only wanted to touch the piano, to feel its keys, to let her soul speak. Yet here she was, surrounded by clapping hands, by faces that no longer looked down on her but looked up in wonder. Some students clapped with wide eyes, still unable to believe what they had witnessed. Others clapped with shame, their hearts heavy with guilt for the cruel words they had spoken earlier. Even the tall boy who had mocked her most pressed his hands together slowly, unwilling, but unable to stop, for even his pride had been broken by the truth of her music. The teacher walked forward, his steps slow but strong. He stopped beside the piano. Looking down at the girl, his eyes were kind, filled with something the girl had not seen in a long time. Respect. He bent slightly and said, "Child, you have a gift, one that cannot be ignored." His voice trembled with emotion. "The world must hear you. This is only the beginning." The girl lifted her tearful eyes. She wanted to speak, but no words came. Only a trembling smile formed on her lips. For years she had been invisible, treated as nothing more than a beggar. Now someone had seen her, truly seen her. The warmth of that moment filled her more than food could. The other students looked on, Some felt jealous, but deep inside, even they knew they had witnessed something they would never forget. Their laughter would forever shame them. Their mockery would forever remind them of how wrong they had been. But at the same time, their hearts had been touched. They knew they would remember this day not as the day they laughed at a beggar, but as the day a prodigy revealed herself. The girl stood slowly from the bench. Her legs shook, but she held her head high. She touched the piano one last time, her small hand sliding across the smooth keys. It was her way of saying goodbye, but also a promise to return. The piano had given her a voice, and she would never let that voice be silenced again. As she walked toward the door, the clapping still followed her. It wrapped around her like a blanket. Soft and warm, her heart beat with new strength. She was no longer just a hungry girl, no longer just a beggar at the door of music. She was something more, something powerful, something unforgettable. The teacher watched her leave, his eyes full of thought. He knew this was not the end of her story. He knew that the world outside was cruel, that her life would still be hard, but he also knew that her gift was too strong to stay hidden. Somehow, someday she would rise, and when she did, the memory of this day would be where it all began. Outside, the cold wind touched her face, but she no longer felt small against it. The world was still wide and difficult, but her heart was steady. She carried the music inside her, and she knew now that even if she was hungry, even if she was alone, her gift would always be with her. It would guide her, protect her, and one day, it would lift her into the place she had always dreamed of. Behind her, the hall stood silent once again. The children inside whispered about what they had seen. Some would tell the story as a warning, others as inspiration. But no matter how they told it, they could never change the truth. They had mocked a hungry girl, and she had answered not with anger but with music. And that music had silenced them all. From that day, she was no longer just a poor child who begged for a chance. She was the girl who played like a prodigy, the girl whose music burned through shame and laughter, the girl who proved that greatness could be born in the most unlikely places. The road ahead would not be easy, but one thing was certain. Her story had only just begun, and long after the sound of her final note had faded from the hall, her legacy had already taken root, strong, unstoppable, and unforgettable.